I remember the tattoo, smiley face, right wrist. Money can't erase that. I'm done hiding behind my father. I'm gonna be better.
I've been sitting on this bench long enough to know that a courtroom isn't just a place where the law is applied. It is a stage where human nature is stripped bare. I have seen hard men weep with regret. I have seen mothers trembling, begging for leniency. But there is one kind of person I have never gotten used to, no matter how many thousands of times I encounter them. The ones who walk in here believing they don't belong. The ones who believe the law is a net designed only for small fish, while they are the sharks who can tear right through it with money. This story began on a bleak Tuesday morning. Rain beat against my office window, creating a steady, dreary rhythm. I drank my coffee black, no sugar. The bitterness helps keep me sharp. My father, a coal miner with calloused hands, used to say, "Boyd, respect isn't something you can buy at the grocery store. It is something you have to build, brick by brick." That sentence has followed me my entire life, and it becomes my compass every time I put on this black robe. Today, I didn't know that philosophy was about to be tested by a kid who had never had to lay a single brick in his life. I stepped into the courtroom. The smell of old wood, paperwork, and that specific scent of anxiety hung in the air. My clerk, Sarah, placed the file on the desk. She looked at me with a rare look of apprehension. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "case number 42. He is quite special." I glanced at the sheet. The defendant's name was Julian Thorne. In the margins, the officer had written a brief note: uncooperative attitude, excessive speed. I sighed. Those notes usually signal a long morning. I adjusted my glasses and looked out at the gallery. Everyone was silent, waiting, but I could feel the tension in the atmosphere. As the session began, we handled the usual violations: a mother who ran a red light because she was rushing to pick up her child, a construction worker who forgot to renew his license. I listened, I weighed the facts, and I issued rulings based on fairness. The rhythm of justice flowed smoothly until Sarah called that name, Julian Thorne. The doors opened, and he walked in, or rather, he glided in. A teenager, about 19 years old, wearing a designer jacket that probably cost more than a month's salary for the people sitting in the back row. He didn't look straight ahead, nor did he look at the floor. He was looking at his phone. He walked with the casual air of someone strolling through a shopping mall, not a defendant facing justice. He approached the podium, one hand stuffed in his pocket, the other still holding that expensive phone. No nervousness, no remorse, only boredom. He let out a long, audible sigh, as if standing here was an insult to his precious time. I stared right at him, waiting for a nod, a greeting, or any sign of basic respect. But there was nothing. He even rolled his eyes up at the ceiling. "Take your hands out of your pockets and put the phone away," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the room's silence. He froze for a second, raising an eyebrow at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. He slowly put the phone away, but the smirk on his lips remained. "State your name," I asked. "Julian," he answered abruptly, with no honorific title. I flipped open the file. The charges were longer than I expected. Doing 60 miles per hour in a school zone, reckless driving, endangering the public. This wasn't a mistake. I looked down at the documents in front of me, and the details made my blood run cold. It wasn't just speeding. It was reckless indifference to human life. 60 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. And not just any zone, an elementary school zone. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the report stated that the crossing guard had to physically push a child out of the way to avoid being struck by his vehicle. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize how fragile life is and how little some people care about it. I looked up from the file, expecting to see at least a flicker of concern on his face, maybe a shadow of fear, now that the charges were being read aloud. But Julian was inspecting his fingernails. He looked bored. He looked like he was waiting in line at a coffee shop, annoyed that the person in front of him was taking too long to order. "Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my voice steady, though it took effort, "do you understand the charges read against you? You were driving 60 miles per hour while children were leaving school. You nearly struck a 6-year-old boy." He let out a short, dismissive laugh, shaking his head as if I had just told a bad joke. "Look," he said, finally making eye contact, though it was filled with condescension. "I was in a hurry. okay? I have places to be. Can we just skip the lecture part? I know how this works. The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Even the bailiff, a man who has seen everything, stiffened by the door. I leaned back in my chair, removing my glasses slowly. I wanted to give him enough rope. You know how this works? I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. Please, enlighten me. Julian smirked, clearly mistaking my patience for submission. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a checkbook. The leather looked more expensive than my car. My dad told me this would happen, he said, flipping it open with a practiced flick of his wrist. He said small town courts like this are just looking for a payday. So, let's cut to the chase. How much is the fine? 500? 1,000? Just tell me the number so I can write the check and get out of here. We have a flight to Aspen at 5, and I really don't want to miss it. He clicked his pen, poised to write, looking at me expectantly. My dad said he'll cover whatever it is. He told me, Julian, don't let them waste your time. Money fixes everything. I sat there, frozen for a moment. Not out of shock, but out of sheer disbelief. At the audacity, I thought about the little boy who almost didn't make it home that day. I thought about his parents, who probably had no idea how close they came to planning a funeral instead of a dinner. And then I looked at this boy, waving a pen around like a magic wand, thinking his father's bank account was a shield that could protect him from reality. Your father, I said, speaking slowly, letting the words hang in the air, seems to have taught you a great deal about economics, but he seems to have forgotten to teach you anything about humanity. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered, rolling his eyes. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. Nobody got hurt, right? It's a victimless crime. It's just a speeding ticket. Why are you making this into a whole thing? Do you know who my father is? There it was. The question I knew was coming. The shield of the entitled. The belief that a last name is a get-out-of-jail-free card. I don't care who your father is, I said, my voice hardening like steel, because your father isn't the one standing in front of me. You are. And this isn't a transaction, Mr. Thorne. This is a court of law. Put the checkbook away. Julian froze. He looked at the checkbook, then back at me, genuinely confused. He blinked, his face flushing slightly with irritation. Excuse me? He snapped. I'm offering to pay you. Isn't that what you want? The state wants money. I have money. What is the problem? The problem, I said, leaning forward until I was looming over the bench, is that you think the law is a service you can buy. You think because you have a flight to Aspen, the safety of a 6-year-old child is an inconvenience. You think you can write a check for reckless endangerment like you're paying a tab at a restaurant. He huffed, slamming the checkbook closed but keeping it in his hand. Fine, whatever. Make it difficult. My dad said you might try to flex your power. How much is bail? I'll pay that too. Just set the price. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a young man who had never been told no in his entire life. I saw a tragedy waiting to happen. If he walked out of here today with just a fine, next time it wouldn't be a near miss. Next time, there would be a body bag. And I would be the one responsible for letting him hold the weapon. You seem to be under the impression that you are leaving today, I said softly. For the first time, the smirk vanished completely. What? He asked, his voice losing that arrogant edge. I continued, my eyes locking onto his. You seem to think the only currency accepted in this courtroom is cash. You are mistaken. Today, the currency is accountability, and I'm afraid your father's checkbook has no value here. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. He looked around, suddenly realizing that no one was on his side. Not the officers, not the clerk, not the people in the gallery. He was alone, but he still didn't get it. Not yet. He still thought this was a negotiation. I'm calling my lawyer, he said, reaching for his phone again. You can't talk to me like this. My dad knows the mayor. He knows the governor. You're going to regret this. Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed louder than a shout. You are not making a phone call. You are not catching a flight to Aspen. And you are certainly not writing a check. I picked up the gavel. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than usual. Bail is denied. Bail denied. Those two words echoed off the mahogany walls like a gunshot. For a moment, Julian didn't move. He stood there, that smirk frozen on his face, but his eyes darted around the room, looking for the punchline. He truly believed this was theater. He believed that at any moment I would crack a smile, take his check, and send him on his way to his ski trip. You're joking, he stammered, his voice cracking. It was the first time his voice sounded like a child's, not a pretender trying to play an adult. You can't deny bail for a traffic ticket. That's illegal. I know my rights. Reckless endangerment is not a traffic ticket, Mr. Thorne, I replied, signaling the bailiff. And in my courtroom, flight risks do not get to walk out the front door just because they have a private jet waiting on the tarmac. Officer Miller, a man who has spent 30 years escorting real criminals, into holding, stepped forward. The jingle of the handcuffs at his belt was the only sound in the room. It cut through the tension sharper than a knife. Julian flinched. He actually took a step back, bumping into the wooden railing behind him. Don't touch me, Julian snapped, holding his hands up, but not to surrender. To push away. This is a $3,000 jacket. You are not putting cuffs on me. Do you hear me? My dad is going to have your badge. He's going to have your job. I watched this display with a mixture of pity and resolve. In all my years, I have seen drug dealers with more dignity. I have seen men who have lost everything stand tall and accept their fate. But this boy, he was crumbling not because he was afraid of jail, but because he was being told no for the first time. He wasn't scared of the punishment. He was insulted by the inconvenience. Miller didn't hesitate. He spun Julian around. The checkbook, that leather-bound shield he thought made him invincible, slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. No one moved to pick it up. It lay there, useless, just paper and ink. Ow! You're hurting me! Julian whined as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. This is police brutality. Everyone is witnessing this. I'm suing all of you. Officer Miller is following procedure, I said, my voice cutting through his tantrums. Something you seem to have no respect for. You see, Mr. Thorne, 5 minutes ago, you stood there and asked me how much it cost to make this go away. You tried to buy justice. I stood up and walked to the edge of the bench, looking down at him. He was struggling against Miller's grip, his face red, his hair mussed. The cool, arrogant demeanor was gone, replaced by the petulant rage of a toddler denied a toy. Look at you, I said, stripped of your father's money, stripped of your checkbook. Who are you? You are just a young man who drove a 2-ton weapon through a school zone without a care in the world. And now, you are going to experience something money cannot fix. You are going to experience consequences. I want my phone call, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. Call my dad, right now. You will get your phone call from the county jail, just like everyone else, I stated flatly. But before you go, I want you to look at something. I picked up the police report again and held up the photo attached to the back. It was a grainy image from the crossing guard's body camera. It showed the blur of his sports car and the terrified face of the 6-year-old boy frozen in the crosswalk. Look at it, I commanded. Julian refused. He turned his head away, squeezing his eyes shut. I don't want to see it. It didn't happen. I didn't hit him. Stop trying to scare me. But you could have, I said. And the only reason you didn't is because a crossing guard risked her own life to shove him out of the way. You didn't break. You didn't swerve. You checked a text message. I slammed the file closed. Take him away for processing. We will reconvene for sentencing in the morning, after Mr. Thorne has spent a night seeing how the other half lives. As Miller dragged him toward the side door, the door that leads to the cells, not the lobby, Julian started pleading. The threats stopped. The begging began. Wait, please! I can't go to jail. I have claustrophobia. I can't be in there with those people. Please, Judge. I'll pay double. I'll pay triple. His voice faded as the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his desperate offers of money. The silence rushed back into the courtroom, filling the space he left behind. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, electrified silence of a room that had just witnessed a collision between fantasy and reality. I sat back down, feeling the adrenaline slowly ebb away. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. I looked at the checkbook still lying on the floor. Sarah, I said quietly to my clerk, who was staring wide-eyed at the empty spot where Julian had stood. Log that checkbook into evidence. Attempted bribery of a court official. And call the district attorney. I have a feeling Julian's father is going to be making some calls, and I want us to be ready. The rest of the afternoon docket passed in a blur of petty thefts and zoning violations, but the atmosphere in the building had shifted. Word travels fast in a courthouse. By the time I recessed for the day, everyone knew that Julian Thorne, the son of Marcus Thorne, the real estate mogul who practically owned half the downtown skyline, was sitting in a holding cell wearing county orange instead of cashmere. I retreated to my chambers, the sanctuary where I usually find peace. But today, the silence felt heavy, charged with an approaching storm. I poured another cup of coffee, staring out the window at the relentless rain. I knew this wasn't over. Men like Marcus Thorne do not let their sons sleep on concrete cots without a fight. They view the law as an obstacle course, and they are used to paying for the shortcuts. At 5:15, just as I was packing my briefcase, Sarah knocked on my door. She didn't wait for an answer. She opened it, her face pale. "Judge," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Thorne is here, the father, and he brought, an entourage." Before I could tell her to call security, the door was pushed open. A man stepped in. He didn't look like his son. Julian was soft, unformed. Marcus Thorne was carved from granite. He wore a suit that was tailored to the millimeter, and his eyes were cold, calculating sharks swimming in a sea of gray. Behind him stood two lawyers in identical suits, carrying briefcases like weapons. "Judge Boyd," Marcus said. He didn't shout. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man discussing a business merger that was going slightly off the rails. "I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding." I didn't stand up. I stayed seated, keeping the heavy oak desk between us. It was a subtle power move, but a necessary one. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Thorne. Your son is in custody. If you wish to discuss his case, you may do so at his arraignment tomorrow morning. My chambers are private." Marcus smiled, a tight, humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. He walked over to one of the guest chairs and sat down without being invited. He crossed his legs, dusting off an invisible speck of lint. "Let's be reasonable, Frank. Can I call you Frank? We're both men of the world. My son is spirited. He makes mistakes, but he is a good boy with a bright future. A night in jail? A criminal record? That stains a young man. It closes doors." "He was doing 60 in a school zone," I replied, my voice flat. "He almost killed a child. That closes doors too, usually coffin lids." The lawyers behind him shifted uncomfortably, but Marcus didn't blink. "Almost," he emphasized. Key word. No one was hurt. No harm. No foul. "Look, I know how these small-town budgets work. You need funding for that new juvenile center, don't you? I can write a check right now as a donation. A very generous donation. Let's call it a gesture of goodwill. You release Julian to my custody. We forget this unpleasantness, and the community benefits." The audacity was breathtaking. The apple truly hadn't fallen far from the tree. The tree was just better at disguising the rot. Julian tried to bribe me with a tantrum. Marcus was trying to bribe me with philanthropy. It was the same poison, just in a prettier bottle. "Mr. Thorne," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the desk, "you are in my chambers, attempting to influence a sitting judge. That is a felony. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." Marcus's face hardened. The mask of civility slipped, revealing the predator underneath. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. "You are playing a dangerous game, Boyd. Do you know how much I contributed to the mayor's re-election campaign? Do you know who I play golf with on Sundays? I can make your life very difficult. I can bury you in paperwork, investigations, and bad press. I can make sure you never sit on a bench again." I stood up then. I am not a tall man, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. "You think you are the first powerful man to threaten me?" I asked. "You think your money intimidates me? You are used to people bending the knee because they are afraid of losing their standing. But I don't care about standing. I care about the law." I pointed to the door. "Get out, and take your lawyers with you." If I see you in here again before court is in session, I will have you arrested for obstruction of justice. And unlike your son, I don't think you'll find the county jail quite so entertaining. Marcus stood up slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks, staring at me with pure hatred. You'll regret this, he said softly. Tomorrow, I'm bringing the best defense team in the state. We will tear your little courtroom apart. Bring them, I challenged. Bring the whole firm. But bring a toothbrush for your son. He's not going to Aspen. He turned and stormed out, his entourage scrambling to keep up. The door slammed shut, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I sank back into my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew he wasn't bluffing. Tomorrow wasn't just going to be a sentencing, it was going to be war. The sun rose the next morning, but it brought no warmth to the courthouse. By 7:30, the parking lot was already full. Marcus Thorne had made good on his promise. He didn't just bring a lawyer, he brought a spectacle. There were news vans parked on the grass, cameras pointed at the front steps, and a buzzing crowd that smelled of scandal. He wanted to turn my courtroom into a circus, hoping that in the chaos, I would lose my grip on the whip. I entered through the back, bypassing the media frenzy. I put on my robe, checking my reflection in the small mirror behind the door. The face staring back was tired, the lines around the eyes a little deeper than yesterday, but the jaw was set. I wasn't going out there to perform. I was going out there to work. When I stepped onto the bench, the gallery was standing room only. In the front row, right behind the defense table, sat Marcus Thorne. He looked immaculate, rested, and smug. He caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a greeting, it was a signal. Game on. Seated next to the empty defendant's chair was a man I recognized from magazine covers. Harrison Sterling, the acquitter. He was the kind of lawyer who defended chemical companies when they poisoned rivers and celebrities when they accidentally forgot to pay millions in taxes. He stood up as I sat down, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Good morning, Your Honor," Sterling boomed, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "We are ready to proceed and correct this." "There is no error, Mr. Sterling," I said, opening the docket, "and you will lower your voice. This is a courtroom, not a press conference. Bring in the defendant." The side door opened. The heavy clank of chains hit the floor before Julian appeared. And when he did, a collective gasp went through the room. The Julian Thorne of yesterday, the boy in the designer jacket with the arrogant smirk, was gone. In his place was a shivering, pale figure drowning in an oversized orange jumpsuit. His hair was matted. His eyes were red-rimmed and wide with terror. He walked with a shuffle, the shackles on his ankles forcing him to take small, humble steps. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at his father. He looked straight at the floor. The night in county lockup had done what 18 years of pampered parenting hadn't. It had broken the illusion of invincibility. Officer Miller guided him to the seat next to Sterling. Julian sank into it, looking like a child who had woken up in a nightmare. Sterling didn't even look at his client. He was too busy arranging his papers, treating Julian like a prop in his grand performance. "Your Honor," Sterling began, buttoning his jacket, "we move for immediate dismissal of all charges. My client was unlawfully detained. The denial of bail was punitive and arbitrary. We have filed a motion for your recusal based on demonstrated bias against the Thorne family." He paused for effect, turning slightly so the reporters in the back could catch his profile. "Furthermore, we have affidavits stating that the signage in the school zone was obscured by overgrown branches. My client could not have known the speed limit dropped. This was not recklessness. It was entrapment by poor city maintenance. It was a classic defense. Attack the process, attack the judge, attack the environment, blame the trees, blame the signs, blame everyone except the person behind the wheel." I let him finish. I let the silence stretch out after his grand speech. I looked at Julian, whose hands were trembling on the table. "Mr. Sterling," I said quietly, "I have reviewed your motions. They are very well written. I'm sure your paralegals worked very hard on them last night." Sterling stiffened. "However," I continued, picking up a document from my stack, "I have also reviewed the dashcam footage from the patrol car that pulled your client over, and I have the maintenance logs from the city. The signs were trimmed 3 days ago." They are visible from 500 feet away. And as for my bias, enforcing the law against a wealthy defendant is not bias, sir. It is equality. Motion for dismissal is denied. Motion for recusal is denied. Marcus Thorne shifted in his seat, his face darkening. Sterling lost his smile. He hadn't expected me to be prepared. He thought I would be intimidated by the paperwork bomb he dropped on my desk. We demand bail, Sterling snapped, dropping the charm. Right now, my client is a student. He has no prior record. Keeping him in custody is a violation of his civil rights. We will get to bail, I said. But first, I want to hear from the defendant. I looked at Julian. Mr. Thorne, stand up. Sterling put a hand on Julian's shoulder, pushing him down. My client asserts his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. He will not be speaking. I am not asking him to incriminate himself, I said, locking eyes with the terrified boy. I am asking him a simple question. Julian, yesterday you offered to write me a check. Today, I want to know, do you still think money fixes everything? Sterling opened his mouth to object, to shout, to shut it down. But Julian moved. He shook off his expensive lawyer's hand. He stood up, the chains rattling. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something real in his eyes. No, Julian whispered. I can't hear you, I said. No, sir, he said, his voice cracking, tears spilling over. I was scared last night. I was really scared. Good, I said. Fear is a teacher. Comfort is a liar. I leaned forward. Mr. Sterling wants you out on bail. He wants you back in your mansion, playing video games, waiting for this to blow over. But I have a different idea. I looked at your record, Julian. You are 19. You are not a child. But you act like one because you have never felt the weight of the world. You think the world exists to serve you. I turned my gaze to Marcus Thorne in the front row. And that is because you have been taught that you are above the consequences. I looked back at Julian. I am going to grant bail. Sterling smirked, looking back at Marcus as if to say, I told you I'd handle it. However, I added, raising my voice to cut off their premature celebration, it will not be cash bail. I am releasing you on a conditional bond. The condition is simple. You are going to remain in the custody of the court for the next 30 days, but not in jail. I pointed to the back of the room, where a woman in a gray uniform was sitting quietly. She was the director of the city morgue. You are going to complete 200 hours of community service, I declared, starting today, and you are going to do it at the medical examiner's office. You are going to see what happens when human bodies meet 2 tons of steel at 60 miles per hour. You are going to clean. You are going to assist. You are going to look death in the face every single day for a month. The color drained from Julian's face. Marcus stood up, furious. This is outrageous! You can't do this! I just did. I slammed the gavel. Mr. Thorne, sit down or you will join your son in those shackles. Julian, do you accept these terms? Or would you prefer to go back to the cell for the next 6 months while you wait for trial? Julian looked at his father, who was red-faced and shouting at Sterling. Then he looked at the exit where freedom lay. Then he looked at me. I'll do it, Julian whispered. I'll do the service. Smart choice, I said. Officer Miller, remove the shackles, but keep the jumpsuit on him until he gets to the morgue. I want him to remember where he belongs if he fails. The gavel strike was the final period at the end of the sentence, but for Marcus Thorne, it was a declaration of war. He didn't storm out this time. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with a terrifying calmness. He leaned over the railing, ignoring the bailiff who stepped forward to block him. He looked me right in the eye, his gaze colder than the winter rain outside. You have made a grave error, Marcus said, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. You think you are teaching a lesson. You are just digging your own grave. Enjoy your little victory, Judge. It will be your last. He turned and signaled to Sterling. They swept out of the courtroom like a dark tide, leaving a wake of uneasy murmurs behind them. I watched them go, feeling the adrenaline drain out of me, replaced by a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. I knew he wasn't making empty threats. Men like Marcus don't threaten, they promise. I retreated to my chambers and sank into the leather chair. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer force of will it took to hold the line against that kind of pressure. Sarah came in a moment later, bringing a fresh pot of coffee. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The worry was etched all over her face. "The mayor called," she said softly, placing the mug on a coaster. "And the district attorney, and a reporter from the Times. The phone hasn't stopped ringing for 20 minutes. Take the phone off the hook, Sarah," I said, closing my eyes. "I'm not speaking to anyone until Julian Thorne completes his first shift." The first week was a siege. The newspapers ran headlines questioning my medieval sentencing methods. Sterling went on every talk show that would have him, painting Julian as a victim of a rogue judge with a vendetta against success. They dug into my past, my finances, even my late wife's medical records, looking for dirt. But I stayed in my lane. I kept my head down, and I waited for the report. It came on a Friday evening, 7 days after the sentencing. It wasn't from a lawyer or a politician. It was from Dr. Aris, the chief medical examiner. She was a woman of few words, someone who had seen more death than a soldier. I picked up the phone. "How is our guest doing, doctor?" "He vomited 3 times on the first day," Aris said, her voice dry and clinical. "He tried to bribe the janitor to let him sit in the break room. He threatened to sue the receptionist for making him wear a hairnet." I let out a weary sigh. "So, he hasn't learned anything." "I didn't say that," Aris interrupted. "That was Monday. On Wednesday, we had a John Doe come in. Car accident. Teenage boy, about Julian's age. Drunk driver crossed the center line. It was messy." Julian was mopping the floor in the hallway when they wheeled the body in. The sheet slipped. The line went silent for a moment. I waited. "He didn't run," Aris continued, her voice softening just a fraction. "He froze. He stared at that boy, a boy who looked just like him, wore the same brand of sneakers, and he went completely pale. He didn't say a word for the rest of the shift. Yesterday, he showed up 15 minutes early. He didn't complain about the smell. He didn't check his phone. He just asked me if there was anything he could do to help." I felt a knot loosen in my chest. "Keep him working, doctor. And thank you." I hung up, feeling a flicker of vindication. The reality check was working. Julian was finally seeing that the world wasn't a playground. It was a fragile, dangerous place where actions had irreversible consequences. But just as I allowed myself a moment of relief, the door to my chambers opened. It wasn't Sarah. It was the chief judge of the circuit court, my superior, Judge Holloway. He was a man I had known for 20 years, a man I respected. But today, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Frank," he said, closing the door behind him, "we need to talk." "I assume this is about the Thorne case," I said, staying seated. Holloway sighed, walking over to the window. "Marcus Thorne has filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Commission. He's alleging misconduct, abuse of power, and mental cruelty to a minor. He's got Sterling pushing for an emergency hearing to revoke your bond conditions." "Let them file," I said. My ruling was sound. The boy needed a wake-up call. "Frank, listen to me." Holloway turned around, his face grim. "It's not just a complaint. They are threatening to pull funding for the entire courthouse renovation project if this continues. The mayor is panicking. The governor is asking questions. You are kicking a hornet's nest, and the swarm is coming for all of us." He walked over to my desk and placed a hand on the file. "I'm taking you off the case, Frank." The air left the room. "You can't do that," I said, my voice rising. "I am the sentencing judge. It is my jurisdiction." "It's administrative," Holloway said, pleading with his eyes. "I'm reassigning it to Judge Miller. He's more amenable to a traditional fine and probation. Julian will be pulled out of the morgue program tomorrow morning. His father is flying him to a private rehabilitation center in Malibu. It's over." "It's not over." I stood up, slamming my hand on the desk. "If you let him go now, you are telling him that he was right. You are telling him that money does fix everything. You are confirming exactly what he told me on the first day, that the law is for poor people." "It's out of my hands," Holloway said, backing away toward the door. "The order is already signed. I'm sorry, Frank, truly. But you picked a fight with a god, and the mortals are getting crushed. Let it go." He left, closing the door softly. I stood there in the silence, staring at the empty chair where Julian had sat, crying, just a week ago. I thought about the boy on the slab at the morgue. I thought about the 6-year-old in the crosswalk. And I felt a rage building inside me that was hotter than anything I had felt before. They thought they could silence me with bureaucracy. They thought they could bury the truth with paperwork and influence. But they had forgotten one thing. I wasn't just a judge. I was a witness. And I wasn't done testifying. I grabbed my coat. I wasn't going home. I was going to the one place where Marcus Thorne couldn't buy his way out of the truth. I was going to the morgue. If they were going to pull Julian out, I was going to be there to look him in the eye one last time. I wanted to see if the boy I sentenced was still there, or if the monster had returned. The city morgue sat in the basement of the municipal hospital, a concrete bunker designed to keep the cold in and the world out. It smelled of antiseptic and formaldehyde, a sharp chemical scent that sticks to your clothes and never really leaves. I walked past the security desk, flashing my badge to a guard who looked too tired to care. I found Dr. Aris in the hallway. She looked up from a clipboard, her face unreadable. "He's in Bay 4, she said, anticipating my question. "He asked to stay late to finish scrubbing the intake room. Said he wanted it clean for the morning shift." I nodded and walked down the long, fluorescent-lit corridor. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system and the squeak of my wet shoes on the linoleum. When I reached Bay 4, I stopped. Julian was there. He wasn't wearing his designer jacket. He was wearing scrubs that were 2 sizes too big, stained with bleach and grime. He was on his knees, scrubbing the floor with a brush. He wasn't doing it lazily. He was putting his back into it, sweating, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. I watched him for a moment. This was the boy who had scoffed at a $1,000 fine. This was the boy who thought a checkbook could fix a shattered life. Now, he was cleaning the floor where strangers' bodies were laid out, trying to wash away something that couldn't be seen. "You missed a spot," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the tiled room. Julian jumped, dropping the brush. He scrambled up, wiping his hands on his pants. When he saw it was me, his shoulders slumped. But he didn't look defiant. He looked exhausted. "Judge," he breathed. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to find you here either," I said, walking further into the room. "I heard you had a rough week." Julian looked down at his shoes, cheap canvas sneakers provided by the state, not the Italian leather he walked in with. "I saw him," Julian whispered. He pointed toward the row of stainless steel drawers on the far wall. "The kid from the crash, he had a tattoo on his wrist. Just a stupid little smiley face. I have one just like it on my ankle." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and haunted. "He was just driving home, Judge. He didn't do anything wrong. And now he's in a drawer. And I'm still here. That's the lottery, Julian," I said softly. "Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you don't. The question is, what do you do with the ticket you've been given?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice trembling. I thought I was untouchable. My dad always told me I was special. But in here," he looked around the cold, sterile room. "In here, nobody cares who your father is. Dead is just dead." It was the breakthrough I had hoped for. The armor of entitlement had been stripped away, revealing the human being underneath. He wasn't fixed, not yet, but he was awake. "You're learning," I said. "That's more than most men learn in a lifetime." Before he could answer, the double doors at the end of the hall burst open. The heavy thud of boots and the sharp click of dress shoes shattered the moment. There he is. I turned to see Harrison Sterling marching down the hallway, flanked by 2 large men in private security uniforms. They weren't police. They were Marcus Thorne's private muscle. Sterling looked out of place in the grim hallway, his suit too bright, his cologne masking the scent of death. "Get away from him," Sterling barked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Judge Boyd, you are engaging in unauthorized contact with a defendant. This is harassment. I will have this added to the complaint." He turned to Julian, his voice switching instantly to a fake, soothing tone. "Julian, grab your things. We're leaving. The order has been signed. You're going home." Julian looked at Sterling, then back at me. Confusion washed over his face. "Home? But I have 2 more weeks. I haven't finished my hours." "You don't have to finish anything," Sterling sneered, stepping between us. "The appellate court granted an emergency stay. Judge Holloway signed the transfer order 10 minutes ago. You're going to a wellness center in Malibu. Ocean views. Therapy. No more. Scrubbing floors. He motioned to the security guards. Get him into the car. His father is waiting. One of the guards reached out and grabbed Julian's arm. Let's go, kid. Julian pulled back. Wait, I didn't finish cleaning the intake. Forget the damn floor, Sterling snapped, losing patience. You are a thorn. You don't clean floors. We are rescuing you from this lunatic's crusade. Now move. I stepped forward, blocking the guard's path. He is not a piece of luggage, Sterling. If he leaves on his own feet. The guard looked at Sterling, unsure. Sterling glared at me, his eyes venomous. Step aside, Frank. Unless you want an obstruction charge to go with your disbarment hearing, you've lost. The system works, just not the way you want it to. I looked at Julian. He was standing in the middle of the tug of war, looking terrified, but it wasn't the same terror as before. He wasn't scared of the morgue anymore. He was scared of them. He was scared of going back to the bubble where nothing mattered, where consequences were just checks to be written. Julian, I said, ignoring the lawyer, you have a choice. You can go with them. You can go to Malibu and pretend this never happened. You can let your father buy your conscience back. I pointed to the wall of drawers. Or you can remember what you saw here. You can remember that boy with the smiley face tattoo. You can decide right now if you want to be a man or if you want to be a puppet. That's enough, Sterling shouted. He shoved past me, grabbing Julian by the shoulder and practically dragging him toward the door. Don't listen to him. He's crazy. You're safe now. Daddy fixed it. Julian stumbled, his feet dragging on the floor he had just scrubbed. He looked back at me over his shoulder. His eyes were desperate, pleading. He wanted to stay. He wanted to finish the work. He realized in that chaotic moment that the punishment was the only thing that felt real. The rescue was the lie. I'm sorry, Judge, Julian called out as they shoved him through the double doors. I didn't ask for this. I'm sorry. The doors swung shut, cutting off his voice. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I stood there alone in Bay 4, staring at the bucket of dirty water and the scrub brush lying on the floor. Sterling was right about one thing. I had lost. The system had bent over backward to protect its own. Money had spoken, and justice had been silenced. But as I looked at the clean patch of floor where Julian had been working, I realized something. They could take him to Malibu. They could buy him a new car. They could erase his record. But they couldn't erase what he had seen in this room. They couldn't scrub the image of that dead boy from his mind. I had lost the case. But I had won the war for Julian's soul. I picked up the scrub brush and placed it on the cart. Then I walked out of the morgue into the rainy night. I wasn't going to quit. Holloway could take my bench. Thorne could take my reputation. But tomorrow morning, I was going to walk into that courthouse, sit in the gallery, and watch them try to bury the truth. And when the time was right, I was going to make sure the dirt they threw didn't cover up the bodies. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained a bruised purple, heavy and low. I walked into the courthouse, not through the judge's entrance, but through the public doors. I passed through the metal detectors, standing in line with the mothers, the debtors, and the worried citizens I usually looked down upon from the bench. Today, I was one of them. I made my way to courtroom 4B, my courtroom, or at least it used to be. The gallery was packed. Reporters were jammed into the back rows, cameras ready. Marcus Thorne sat in the front row, his posture relaxed, his face the picture of benevolent victory. Beside him sat Harrison Sterling, checking his watch, looking bored, and at the defense table sat Julian. But he didn't look like the boy who had been dragged out of the morgue the night before. They had cleaned him up. He was wearing a fresh suit, his hair styled, his face scrubbed pink. But his eyes were still staring at something no one else could see. He looked hollowed out. Judge Miller took the bench. He was a good man, but a timid one. He avoided looking at the gallery. He kept his head down, reading from the script that had been written for him by power and influence. Case number 42B, Miller mumbled. State versus Thorne. I understand there is a motion to resolve. Yes, Your Honor. Sterling stood up, smooth as oil. In light of the defendant's immediate enrollment in a residential wellness program and the irregularities in the initial sentencing, the district attorney has agreed to a plea of nolo contendere to a simple traffic violation. We agree to a fine of $5,000 and 6 months of unsupervised probation. A fine, $5,000. For Marcus Thorne, that was less than the cost of the suit he was wearing. It was an insult. It was a erasure of everything that had happened. The court accepts the plea, Miller said quickly, banging the gavel before the echo of the offer had even faded. Mr. Thorne is free to go. It was over in 2 minutes. The reporters scribbled furiously. Marcus Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. He turned to the gallery, ready to give a statement to the press, ready to spin the narrative of a father protecting his son from a tyrannical system. That's when he saw me. I was standing in the back, leaning against the wall. I wasn't wearing my robe. I was just a man in a raincoat. But when Marcus saw me, his smile faltered. He looked at me with contempt, but underneath it, there was a flicker of fear, because he knew that I knew. He knew that no matter how much money he spent, he couldn't buy the memory out of my head. Sterling steered Julian toward the aisle. Come on, Julian. The car is waiting. Julian stood up mechanically. He started to walk, his father guiding him by the elbow like a prize poodle. The cameras flashed, blinding and chaotic. Julian, Julian, how do you feel? Mr. Thorne. Is this a vindication? They moved toward the doors, toward me. As they got closer, Marcus leaned in to whisper something to me. Probably a final gloat, a final reminder of who owned this city. But Julian stopped. He stopped right in front of me, bringing the entire entourage to a halt. The cameras went wild. Sterling tried to pull him forward, but Julian planted his feet. He looked at me. The cameras didn't matter. His father didn't matter. I remember, Julian whispered. It was barely audible over the noise of the crowd, but I heard it. I remember the tattoo, he said, his voice trembling but clear. Smiley face, right wrist. Marcus froze. He looked at his son, then at me, confusion warring with anger. What are you talking about? Julian, move. I'm going to finish it, Julian said, looking me dead in the eye. Not the hours, the work. I'm going to be better. He didn't wait for my response. He didn't wait for his father's permission. He turned and walked through the doors, stepping out into the cold morning air. Marcus Thorne stood there for a second, looking at the empty space where his son used to be. For the first time, the billionaire looked bankrupt. He had bought the verdict, but he had lost the boy. He glared at me one last time, then rushed after his son, the lawyers trailing behind him like scavengers. The courtroom emptied out. The reporters chased the story onto the steps. Judge Miller hurried off the bench, disappearing into his chambers. I stayed. I walked down the aisle, past the empty defense table, past the spot where the checkbook had fallen. I stood at the gate of the bar, looking up at the empty judge's chair. Sarah came up beside me, holding a cardboard box. They cleaned out your office, Judge, she said softly. Holloway said you're on administrative leave until the review board meets. He said, it doesn't look good. I took the box from her. It was light. A few photos, a coffee mug, a framed copy of the Constitution. It's fine, Sarah, I said. Was it worth it? She asked, tears welling in her eyes. You lost your bench, Frank. You lost everything. I looked at the door where Julian had exited. I thought about the fear in his eyes when he first walked in, and the resolve in his voice when he walked out. I thought about the thousands of kids like him who think the world has no edges until they fall off. And I thought about the one kid who maybe, just maybe, wouldn't fall because he finally saw the ground. I didn't lose everything, Sarah, I said, adjusting my coat. I just paid the price of admission. I walked out of the courthouse into the gray light. The for sale sign on Justice had been put up, but I wasn't buying. I was done with the law for now. But as I walked down the steps, I knew one thing for certain. Julian Thorne would never drive 60 miles per hour in a school zone again. His father paid $5,000 for a lie. I paid my career for the truth. And looking at the way Julian walked away from his father, I knew I got the better deal. This is Judge Boyd. Court is adjourned.